Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah, joined once again by Meg Wochnick, and we are going deeper into the state football playoffs. It is quarterfinal weekend. We have 4 teams playing their biggest games of the season. We're here to break it down, and the theme of today's episode is why each of these teams that our locals are facing might be dangerous in the state playoffs. Meg, how are you feeling headed into this quarterfinal round?
Final 8, we have typical November football playoff weather. It's here, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's the best time of the year. And so we have 4 games to break down today from the First Pacific Financial Studio. Thanks again to First Pacific Financial in downtown Vancouver for supporting this show, supporting high school athletics, and supporting the community at large. But let's get right into it. Skyview versus Sumner, Arlington versus Camas, Life Christian versus Seton Catholic, and Montesano versus La Center. All 4 of these matchups to me are so intriguing.
They are across the board, really. So we've got 3 local, 1 up north. It's going to be exciting football. Can't wait. Well,
let's start with the one game that is up north, Skyview versus Sumner. Skyview getting past Bothell last weekend in the first round. Sumner, a perennial power. Meg, why do you think Sumner might present a challenge to Skyview here in the state quarterfinals?
Well, first and foremost, Keith Ross, who's in his 24th year at Sumner, he is pretty much one of the godfathers of high school coaches in Washington for high school football. Everything about this team points to the best well-rounded team that he's had in his 24 years, offensively, defensively. There's so much talent, there's so much strength, there's so much depth across the board. It starts with that defense. There's just a lot of shutdown corners or front sevens outstanding. You look at the offensive side, a lot of weapons, not only in the run game, but the passing attack. What's new this year is their starting quarterback, Nate Donovan, who, if you're a Camas fan listening and watching to this, he is the quarterback from Mount Si that last year that led Mount Si to that epic upset, a 14 seed win over a 3rd seed Camas team in the first round of the playoffs. This is a kid, he's only a junior, but he tends to really rise his game when the stakes are the highest. When they played Westland, a Westland team coached by former Camas coach John Eagle, he had probably one of his best games of his career on top of that upset win over Camas last year. There was a stretch during the season where he had 4 consecutive 300-plus yards passing. He's got a lot of weapons, one of them being Carter Coquet. He's a Montana State commit for tight end. A lot of weapons for this Sumner team, and a team well deserving of that number 2 seed overall in the state seeding. So if there's 1 or 2 things that are consistent with these Keith Ross coached Sumner teams, they're well coached, they're well disciplined, they've got a stout defense, and they got a pretty good balanced attack between the pass and the run. So this is a challenge that's going to be a good one for Skyview. But on the flip side, I know this won't be an easy one for Sumner against a very quality Skyview team.
You mentioned West Linn. West Linn is one of 3 common opponents that Sumner and Skyview shared this year. Obviously, I think if you're Skyview, you kind of throw out the 45-0 loss to West Linn, being that you're without your quarterback, and you just kind of ran into a buzzsaw that night. Sumner lost to West Linn as well, but only by 1 touchdown, 34-27. An interesting result that kind of jumped out to me when looking at each team's schedule. Puyallup, Skyview handled Puyallup down here on a Saturday game pretty easily, 38-8. Puyallup really tested Sumner. Sumner only won that game 17-14. Likewise, Graham-Kapowson on both teams' schedules. Obviously, Skyview has a lot of fond memories about that epic comeback that they made to win week 2 against Graham-Kapowson, 21-17. Sumner beat Graham-Kapowson 23-11 later in the season. So what, if anything, can we take from those common opponents?
Well, not just the common opponents. I think really you look at the strength of schedule of Sumner as well. They opened the season upsetting 2-time defending state champion Lake Stevens in overtime. Like I mentioned, they come down, and it was really a tremendous battle with Westland, basically a back-and-forth game until the final possession with 3 minutes to go when Westland took that lead for good. A Westland team that at the time was still the undefeated and the number 2 ranked team in the Oregon 6A rankings. But just the common opponents, the South Puget Sound 4A is just really stacked this year. There's really no really dominant team this year. Yes, Sumner is record-wise is going in just one loss, but there's so many similarities between Graham-Kapowson and Sumner that I think Skyview has to be really, really good, especially with the way its defense is playing going into Saturday's game in Sumner.
Well, I was going to ask you, we've introduced you now to Sumner, so you know what challenge awaits the Storm. What does Skyview have to do well on Saturday night to come out on top?
Well, first and foremost is not turn over the ball. I think you get to the final eight, you're facing always quality teams regardless of the classification. Don't turn the ball over. This is actually the second time in 4 years these two teams have faced off in the postseason. Back in 2021 in the fall, they went up. Skyview went up to Sumner and ultimately had a season-ending defeat in the first round against Sumner, 24-10. In that game, there were some mistakes in that one as well that prevented Skyview from getting over the top. So first and foremost, take care of the ball. Go to your playmakers. Go to your weapons. Gavin Packer, now the offensive MVP for the 4A Greater St. Helens League. That list coming out earlier this week. Go to your weapons. Go to those big playmakers who know how to make plays, especially in the big games, and rely on your tremendous defense that has gotten you to the state quarterfinal. So I think as long as Skyview can play its ball, it's going to be right there. I think it's going to be a very low-scoring game. I'm talking like 17-13. Both defenses are really good. Don't really expect a shootout. So the first team to 20 might win this one.
Very cool. Number 7, Skyview. Number 2, Sumner. 7 p.m. Saturday up at Sunset Chev Stadium in Sumner. We can't wait to see how that goes. Let's move on. 1 p.m. Doc Harris, number 1 seed, undefeated Camas, hosts Arlington, 10-1, a team that if you look at their results over the year, this is an Arlington team that can put up some points. Meg, what makes Arlington a challenge for Camas?
It starts with their quarterback, Leighton Martin. Not only he's a reigning all-state 3A quarterback. Before this year, the reclassification, Arlington was a long-standing 3A program, a team that reached the 3A quarters this year, now in the 4A ranks. He's also an all-state point guard in basketball, too. So you talk about kind of that leader, that orchestrating that offense. It starts with him. He can throw, he can run, got a lot of weapons. The secondary is elite, holding a very good Graham-Kapowson team to just 6 points. And a game last weekend that, as you can imagine, the weather was not favorable. It was high 30s up in Snohomish County. Hail, sleet, wind, everything up there. So to put up 42 points over a very good Graham-Kapowson team, a team that barely, basically, was a week 2 game against Skyview away from being 1-1 at that point, ultimately seeing Skyview come back to win that one after leading 17-0. But this is going to be, I think, a really interesting matchup because the strength of Arlington defensively, on the flip side for Camas, with their passing attack, that also is the strength. But the weakness for Arlington is that run defense. So is this the game where we're going to see Coach Adam Matheson try to run the ball a little bit more and have a little bit more quarterback design runs for Jake Davidson? I mentioned last week about how so much the run game was part of Coach Matheson's offense when he was at Mountain View for all those years. Are we finally going to see a 6'4", 190-pound Jake Davidson get double-digit carries in this one? So look for the run game to possibly take that next step forward. But this is going to be a fantastic game. Could be a high-scoring one, too.
Yeah, we're talking about, Jake Davidson, Titan Brody could see a heavy workload. But you talk about it possibly being a shootout. Arlington has scored 33 or more points in 10 out of 11 games this year, including several of those being 45 or more points. What does Camas's defense have to do to slow down that offense?
First and foremost, shut down the pass.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. They've got athletes, multi-sport athletes back there in the secondary. Chase McGee, Jack McDonald, Anthony Forner. Just those guys just know how to do their jobs, do it well, and are always in the right spots at the right time. So this is probably going to be the team that possibly Camas has seen the most as far as kind of that deep ball threat. But as long as that front 7 takes care of business, which that is a very good strength of Camas defensively, I think the secondary should do its job pretty well against Arlington.
Well, one key I think also for Camas is avoiding the kind of slow start that happened last week against Curtis. Obviously, Camas dominated the second half in a 41-6 win, a game they only led 9-6 at halftime. What, if anything, should Camas maybe be concerned about after that slow start?
Not really concerned.
Yeah.
The opening 3 drives for Camas, it was punt, turnover on downs deep in the red zone. So not really anything to be concerned about. They ended up scoring 32 unanswered points in the final 2 quarters to win that game pretty comfortably, and the defense didn't allow a touchdown. That 6 points by Curtis was a 50-yard interception return for a touchdown in the second quarter. So not really too much a concern in that one, although the 9-6 advantage at halftime was only the slimmest margin of lead for Camas in all of their 11 games so far.
All right, 1 p.m. Doc Harris Stadium Saturday. It is a doubleheader at Doc Harris Stadium because later on Saturday at 7 p.m., it's Seton Cougar country. And the Seton Catholic Cougars, 10-0, number 2 seed. We've been talking about this matchup for a couple of weeks, this potential matchup, and I know, Meg, you're really excited to see how this one does. Number 7, I think, Life Christian comes in. Life Christian from the Tacoma area, 9-1 record. This Life Christian team can be really good. What, Meg, does Life Christian do that makes them such a challenge to Seton Catholic?
A lot of things. First and foremost, their only loss for Life Christian was a rare Week 8 non-league game against 3A Enumclaw, an Enumclaw team that going into the state playoffs only had 1 loss themselves and were seeded number 9 for the 3A state playoffs, a game that Life Christian only trailed 7-0 going into the fourth quarter before Enumclaw really kind of put on the gas the final 12 minutes to pull away to win 27-0. This is, I think, one of the more intriguing quarterfinal matchups we're going to see across the state, across all 6 classifications. And there's going to be, talking with a number of coaches, there's going to be some across the state who are really going to look forward to seeing the result of this one. First and foremost, Life Christian, they don't have a whole lot of depth. That is one weakness for them. Their roster is only 27 players deep, but what they lack in the depth, that is the strength of Seton, one of their strengths, they've got dudes all over the place. And it starts with their quarterback, Jabez Boyd, who is the absolute definition of what you want in that dual threat quarterback. Last week in their win over Kings, they were down 11 inside 4 minutes to go. They orchestrate back-to-back drives. He accumulated 400 of total yards of offense by himself, was responsible for 6 touchdowns, and they've got an all-freshman offensive line, 3 of whom are 300 or more pounds. So the depth might be there, but the talent certainly is. So this is, that's just a few of the reasons why I think this is going to be a really intriguing game, because clearly they can put up a lot of points. They do give up a lot of points, but it might be an absolute track meet at Doc Harris.
Well, I think you mentioned that depth, and maybe it might be a situation where if you can get out ahead and maybe wear down Life Christian, you might be able to put some distance between them. But they showed last week in that comeback that they have enough in the tank to put on a rally late.
They have plenty in the tank. So they got pretty much the majority of their starters go both ways. They platoon a couple of guys on that offensive line, but Jabez Boyd, their starting quarterback, also is one of their starting corners on defense. So I think as the game wears on, and depending how it goes, Seton, given their depth and their talent in depth in multiple positions, might be able to kind of wear down Life Christian. But clearly, this is a team that knows how to score points, knows how to score a lot of them, and so far really hasn't gotten tired in any of their previous 11 games.
Now, is there one position group for Seton Catholic that you think will be key in this matchup, or one that you think matches up pretty well against Life Christian?
Yeah, I think one of the strengths is going to be how well the run game is going to come alive. And I'm talking about Jacob Williams, their standout senior in the backfield at tailback. So I think, if he continues to do what he has done all season, season, an MVP type performance for the Seton Catholic Cougars. I think Seton's going to be just fine in this one.
All right, number 2, Seton Catholic, starting their state playoff journey after getting that first round bye, taking on Life Christian, 7 p.m., Doc Harris Stadium, Saturday. If you love good small school football, get out there. Also, if you love good small school football, get out to Woodland High School at 1 p.m. That is the new home field for Le Center. Obviously, they don't want to have a state playoff game up in the mud on the natural turf, considering how the weather has been in the Pacific Northwest the last few weeks. So Le Center moves over to the artificial turf at Woodland, where the number 3 Wildcats take on a familiar team, a familiar foe in Montesano. Le Center and Montesano played earlier this year, but this is a different Montesano team than the one that the Wildcats handled so easily in week 1. Why is Montesano a dangerous team now in the quarterfinals that maybe they weren't early in the season?
I mentioned a few minutes ago about Keith Ross at Sumner being a godfather of coaches in the state. So was Terry Jensen at Montesano, 40 years running with the Crimson and Gray, just well-oiled machine. I mean, this is a program that has experience, knows how to win football games, and a team that Le Center handled pretty convincingly, 35-7 out in Grays Harbor County to open the season. But different personnel changes have happened since then, and so have big victories for the Bulldogs. And one of them that we touched on last week was their upset win over Nooksack Valley at home, 34-28, a team that was in the top 3 of RPI, top 3 AP state rankings, and only had 1 loss, which was against probably the eventual state champions coming up in Tumwater. And what's interesting about that game is it really kind of jump-started what we've seen these last 3 weeks with Montesano. Only allowed 13 points over these last 3 weeks, 2 of which have come in postseason games. And 6 days prior to that win over Nooksack was, you look at schedule-wise, might have been their most disappointing loss, 16-13 over Rochester. So a pretty big swing over 6 days that's really kind of catapulted the Bulldogs into a number 6 seed, as well as playing their best football right now. Well,
you mentioned it, only given up 13 points over the last 3 games since that Nooksack Valley win. They've scored 125 points over that stretch. So obviously clicking on both sides of the ball. But how do you think a team like that did it to bounce back from a really disappointing loss? Is that just the unpredictable nature of high school football, or does sometimes a team need a wake-up call? And in this case, Montesano got it and responded from maybe their most disappointing performance of the year with their best performance of the year the next week.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, 35-7, even to start the season against Le Center, that 7 points, that's just not typical Montesano football. To hold them to 7 points was just a tremendous defensive performance by Le Center. But just looking at just the matchup head-to-head, physicality-wise, that favors Le Center. Depth-wise, that favors Le Center. Number of position groups, that favors Le Center. And so I would say Le Center would be favored again to win this one, but again, we're talking about the Final 8. Anything can happen, and it's been a minute since Le Center won a state playoff football game. Just like Le Center last week, they got that coveted top 4 seed and had a bye, and so they've essentially had 2 weeks to prepare for a Montesano team that they beat by 28 to open the season in September.
Well, I'm eager to see how the Le Center run game fares. I think that's going to be a key with Isaac Cromie, obviously, and then the different wrinkles that the Le Center can throw in with an extra week to prepare. I think, like we mentioned last week, there's going to be a few little gadget plays that maybe we haven't seen from Le Center this week or this year yet, but when it comes down to it, state playoff football is about running the ball and defense. How do you think Le Center fares in both of those assets?
I think that still favors Le Center. Just when I think of defense, I think of that great defensive front. Mason Klein is having a heck of a year at that linebacker spot. Wyatt Aislinn, their starting quarterback, repeated as the league's defensive MVP, just a standout middle linebacker. So assuming that Montesano does what Montesano does as well, I know they got a great run game as well. Their quarterback, Tyson Perry, has also had a fantastic year throwing the ball, but I think they're going to really set that tone with that front seven for Le Center.
Well, What's going to be really interesting about this week is how it potentially stacks up the following week in the state semifinals, because if Camas takes care of business, they're the number one seed. They'll be the de facto home team, albeit maybe not at Doc Harris, but you can expect a state semifinal matchup down here. Plus, if Seton Catholic or La Center win, they'll be the higher seed going into next week. If they both win, we will have a rematch of the Week 9 Trico League Throwdown. That was one of the games of the year up in the mud at La Center. Dream scenario, Camas, Seton, and La Center all win and all play down here next week. What could that look like, and where could that possibly be?
What could that look like? A very busy McKenzie Stadium on that Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend. That's what it would look like. So it would be the first time since 2018 that we would have 3 Clark County teams in the state semifinals. That year it was Hawkinson, Mountain View, and Union. Hawkinson and Union went on to win both the 2A and the 4A state championships that following week. So it would be a very busy week for McKenzie, and it would also be a very busy week for us as well, with 3 football teams in the state semis.
Well, I think you can tell what we're hoping happens, but again, it's high school football. It's the quarterfinals. Every opponent and every team that has reached this part of the state playoffs is a good team, a dangerous team, and so the local teams down here are going to have to bring their A game to the state quarterfinals on Saturday. We'll be spread all around. We also have soccer going on up in Tacoma this weekend with Ridgefield and Columbia River and Seton Catholic up there in the Final Four at Mount Tahoma High School. I'm going to be over at 3A, 4A volleyball, where Camas and Prairie are looking for some, quality showings, possibly leaving there with a trophy, or even I think both of them could possibly get to that Final Four. And then we'll see what happens, as we saw with Columbia River winning their 4th consecutive 2A title. So always drama in volleyball, but football is going to be amazing on Saturday. Be sure to choose, if you're going to stay local, maybe get out to Doc Harris for a doubleheader, or head up to Woodland to see how La Center does. If you're hitting the road and going up to cheer on Skyview, safe travels, 7 p.m. Saturday up in Sumner. We're going to be spread all around. We're going to be bringing that coverage to you. Be sure to follow us on our social medias at 360 Preps, and we will see you out at the field.